Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. Today is going to be a recommendations video, so if you liked this book then you might also like this book type of video, and this is a concept that I have been doing over on Instagram for quite a while. I have filmed various different reels with popular books and then making some recommendations, and I thought that I would just roll it out over to here. But what I'm going to do that's slightly different is I'm going to talk about more books but fewer recommendations, rather than one book and lots of recommendations. Hopefully that makes sense. I have picked out 5 very popular books, either popular on BookTok or Bookstagram or just in the book community in general, and then I'm going to recommend some books to you. So hopefully I'll also manage to recommend some books that maybe you haven't come across before, that might be fairly unknown, which I always love to do, and then that might give you some inspiration on new books to pick up. So without further ado, let's jump in. The first book that I'm going to talk about is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Just to add a caveat that all the books that I'm going to talk about in this video I have personally read, and so I'm personally recommending. So Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. If you're not familiar, this is a Greek mythological retelling of the story of Achilles. So very popular. Lots of people refer to it as an incredibly heartbreaking story that pretty much ruins you when you read it, and I would say that that is fairly accurate. So my recommendations for Song of Achilles, it would be really easy to also suggest Circus because it's by the same author, but if it is that same style of writing and another mythological retelling that you are looking for, then Circus is the obvious choice. I would also recommend The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. This is a book that I know I have talked about countless times because it's one of my favourite books that I have ever read. If I could give a book more than 5 stars, The Wolf Den would definitely be one that would fit in that category. And the reason that I would recommend it is because you have that very vivid historical setting. It's set in Pompeii before the ruin of the city, so you have that historical setting. You also have a rich cast of characters and quite a high stakes setting. So Wolf Den is about a group of women who have been enslaved in a very popular brothel in Pompeii. And we have one main character that we're predominantly following, and we just look at these women's lives, their experiences, their hopes for the future, because despite their really bleak setting and their situations, they do have hope for the future. They have dreams and thoughts about what they'll do when they become free, all of that kind of stuff, and it's just a fantastic book. And there are also several moments which pull on the heartstrings, which if you really enjoyed that element of Song of Achilles, then I think that you will also enjoy that in The Wolf Den. And then if you are interested in Greek mythology but you don't necessarily want that historical setting, then I would also recommend Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This takes all the fun and interest of Greek mythology and puts it in a modern day setting. So the basics of the story are that we have the descendants of various Greek heroes who are among us now, and they are part of great wealthy houses. As a punishment, Zeus sends a number of gods to walk the earth every 7 years. This forms part of a competition in which the descendants of these Greek houses try to kill the gods to take their powers and ascend into immortality themselves. So as I say, it takes all the interesting things about Greek mythology but it puts it in a modern day setting. So I would definitely recommend those if you enjoyed A Song of Achilles. Next up we have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, another very popular book and one which was a 5-star for me. So if you aren't familiar with this book, we are following the story of Evelyn Hugo, a huge Hollywood starlet, and we have 2 timelines. We have a present day timeline where Evelyn has decided to tell her story to a fairly unknown journalist, and so we're following the outcome of that. And then we also have Evelyn's rise to fame in the 50s, and then her career up to when she decides to retire from Hollywood in the 80s, and all the Hollywood glitz and glamour and fame, and don't want to say too much more, I'm trying to think of how to describe it, just all the things that come along with that, as you might imagine. It's very difficult to think of a book to recommend for as a comparison to this that's not just another Taylor Jenkins Reid book. If you haven't picked up any of her other work, I would definitely recommend Daisy Jones and the Six, and also Malibu Rising, for the same writing style, the same vivid settings, and the same type of characters. All of those, all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's more modern books all follow very similar themes and styles, so I would definitely recommend those. And then I would also recommend The Paris Wife by Paula McGlynn, which I think has echoes of Evelyn Hugo. It is the story of Ernest Hemingway's first marriage, and although it's set a little bit earlier, it's set in the 1920s, it definitely has the same vibe as Evelyn. So we have Ernest's first wife, who was a very innocent 18-year-old when he met her. He sweeps her off her feet, he takes her to Paris, and there she basically has to learn how to navigate a society that is unlike anything that she was expecting. So it's full of artists and writers and creative types and all the various things that you might imagine go along with that. So that's where I would say it's very similar to Evelyn Hugo. We also have very similar characters. You know, we have these innocent characters, but who are quite vulnerable to the wiles of the people around them, who are perhaps a little bit more world wise or cutthroat. So it's very similar in that regard as well. So definitely one that if you haven't heard of, I would recommend. Then we have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This was obviously going to feature on this list, and as one of my all-time favourite books, it's really difficult to just pick one or two to recommend to you. So I've gone for one that I think is a fairly solid recommendation, and then one which I think is probably a little bit more out there, but if you give it a shot you might just be surprised. So first of all, Crawdads. This has literally been everywhere, but if you're not sure what it's about, it's a coming of age story set in Carolina about a young girl who is living on the edges of a town in the marshes, and she is very much viewed as an outsider. She was abandoned by her family. She has pretty much raised herself, and as I say, she lives out in seclusion in these marshes. And then we also have a murder mystery element when the town's sweetheart is found dead, and our marsh girl Kaya is accused of being involved somehow in the death of this person. And we're then following Kaya's childhood and as she grows up, and we're also following the discovery of what exactly happened to see this person die. So that's that story. I would recommend, if you enjoyed Crawdads, The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. This has got so many similarities thematically. We have a young girl in quite a bleak and hostile environment. We have coming of age. We've got strong female characters. We've got a rich and vivid setting. We have got strong imagery and nature and wildlife. There are loads and loads of similarities, so I would highly recommend trying The Great Alone if you enjoyed Where the Crawdads Sing. And then the one that's a little bit out there, I would like to recommend Beartown by Fredrik Backman. This is a book that I don't think gets enough airtime, and I think it's because you have to be able to either deal with the frequent hockey references or be able to read past that when you're reading the story. But again, I would say that it has very similar echoes to Crawdads. So you've got this bleak setting, you've got these high stakes, you've got this mystery element of what actually has gone on in a certain situation, you've got coming of age. You've got beautiful writing, tense moments, and things that kind of make your heart hurt and things that you find frustrating, all very similar to Crawdads. But as I say, you have to be able to see past the hockey references. So this particular book, we are following a hockey team who basically the future of the town is riding on the success of this hockey team, which is made up of teenagers. So if they start to win, then money will be brought into the town, and the town is basically on the edge of complete decline. And so there's lots and lots of pressure riding on the shoulders of these teenage boys, and then something happens and half the town want to cover it up and half the town want to face it and to deal with it, and it all kind of centers around this hockey team and some of the players on the hockey team and some of the other people in the town. And I don't want to say too much more than that because I really think it's better going in and kind of discovering it as you go along, but I genuinely don't think it gets talked about enough for the incredible story that it is. You just have to be able to ignore the sports references, and then you will fly through it. And then we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. You'll know if you've been around here for a little while, and you'll notice that I don't have a physical copy of it, that Addie LaRue was a much anticipated read for me, but unfortunately I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, and I actually have passed my copy on now. That's not to say that it's not a good book, that's not to say that it doesn't have its audience out there. I think it's almost the type of book that I would like to reread with lower expectations, and I think that I would enjoy it more than I did because it had been amped up. A lot of the buzzwords surrounding it were things that are feature in my favourite books, and yeah, I just was really looking forward to it. But I know that it is a very popular book, so I do want to make some recommendations for it. Editing Jess coming on to say that I never told you what Addie LaRue was actually about before going on to recommend some books. So basically we have a young girl called Addie who is desperate to leave her life. She lives in 18th century France in this really rural village, and she feels very trapped by the expectations placed on her that she marries, has children, stays in the village which she is born into. So a very simple basic life, and she just wants something more for herself, and she makes a pact with an entity, a dark entity, basically for immortality. But as with the way that all of these things go, it comes with a catch, and that is that Addie will never die, but she will also always be forgotten. So once she is out of someone's sight, they don't remember who she is until we have a present day timeline, so kind of around the 2000s, when Addie meets someone in a bookshop and they remember who she is. And we follow Addie in this present day timeline, but we also look back at her experiences throughout the various decades, centuries, etc., and her relationship with this darker entity as well. And it has quite an unexpected ending. As I say, it wasn't the book that I hoped it would be, and I think that's largely because I felt that it missed a trick. I thought that it could have done something far more exotic and interesting with the experiences that Addie has throughout the ages, but also this relationship with this dark entity. I just thought it could have gone just that little bit further and I would have really enjoyed it. So that's what Addie is about. Now, so the first book that I'm going to recommend is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I think that this has a lot of similarities, both in terms of the basic setup and then also in terms of the more unusual and abstract writing style, because if you've read The Night Circus then you will know that it's a reading experience unlike any other. It really does take a while to get into the way that the story is told, but it does actually pay off beautifully once you get into it. So the basic premise is that we have this circus. The circus just appears overnight and then disappears, and there's a lot of magic and mysticism surrounding the circus, but that really is just the setting for this story. We're actually following two characters who, when they are children, enter into a challenge with one another, not really understanding the implications of the challenge that they are making, and then we follow them as they go through training and then as their paths cross once again in the future. And I don't really want to say much more than that, partly because it's very difficult to fully capture the essence of The Night Circus. It's the type of book that has layer upon layer, and it's just wonderful to go in and discover that for yourself. I will also say there is a romance element. There's a lot about loyalty, about friendship, about trust, about love. All of that is woven through the story. But yeah, it's a reading experience unlike any other I think I've ever had. It's very, very vivid. It's very, very vivid. It's very, very immersive. And I think if you liked Addie LaRue, The Night Circus would be a solid choice for you. And if the part of Addie LaRue that you really enjoyed was this concept of getting to almost relive your life again and again, then I would recommend Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. And I'll just read you the kind of opening paragraph in the blurb. It's during a snowstorm in England in 1910, a baby is born and dies before she can take her first breath. During a snowstorm in England in 1910, the same baby is born and lives to tell the tale. So we're following our main character Ursula as she basically gets to relive various turbulent events throughout a number of decades, and essentially gets to have a do-over repeatedly. And it looks at the questions and explores the idea, sorry, there's something floating there. It explores the idea of, if you could do things again, would you do them differently? And what would you learn about people, and what would you learn about yourself along the way? So again, another recommendation. And I think if you liked the historical element of Addie LaRue as well, because obviously Addie lives her life over various different time periods, then this will also appeal. And then finally for this, which I'm sure will just be a part one because I can think of many more books that I would like to come and recommend, I'm going to talk about A Gentleman in Moscow by Immortals. This is historical fiction. It's another book that I have talked about, and I'm really pleased to see that it is growing in popularity in the book talk community. I was quite surprised when I went into Waterstones recently because they have a book talk table in my local Waterstones, and this was on it, and I hadn't realised that it was having kind of a resurgence. But it's a fantastic book with fantastic characters, and I'm so pleased to see that people are now talking about it and sharing about it. So this is set in the 20s, and we're basically following a count who is imprisoned in a hotel, and we get to follow all the different characters that he meets, his relationship with one character in particular, which is just so wonderfully done. I don't want to say too much more. If you like quiet books that are predominantly character driven, as you can imagine, there's not a whole lot of plot that could go along with someone basically being trapped in one place. So this is about your characters with beautiful storytelling and beautiful writing, then this is definitely a book that you should try. It's incredibly quiet and incredibly slow. If you like fast page turners, if you like high stakes, if you like tension, you're probably not going to find it in this book. But if you like whimsy, if you like story, just good storytelling, if you want a book that you can sit down with and get lost in, this would be the choice. And the comparisons that I would make for this one would be Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell, which I think has a very similar feel to it. It is quiet, it is slow, it is about our characters. We are basically just peeking into the lives of these characters at a particular moment in time and following them on a journey for a very short period. Hamlet is about the family of Shakespeare, so predominantly his wife, but also at the very beginning of the book we know that he loses a child, and so we're following the lead up to that moment, how it happens, all the other various things surrounding it. But it just has that quality of storytelling which you also find in A Gentleman in Moscow, and there are moments that are utterly heartbreaking. Hamlet is one of the most poetic, most beautiful stories that I have ever read, and I was completely crushed in the end. Even though I knew what was coming, what the outcome was going to be, it still just pulled on all the heartstrings. And then the other book that I would recommend here is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. Again, in terms of its storytelling, but it has that historical fiction element to it. Obviously Hamlet does as well, because it's about the family of Shakespeare, but you don't really feel that it is historical. You could really be reading pretty much any period in time, whereas The Underground Railroad the Underground Railroad definitely has that historical fiction feel to it. It also has a cast of characters that you can really get behind, and again it has that more slower exploration of the story, although this one does feature more high stakes. So we are following a character who has escaped slavery and is searching for freedom, and they are using the Underground Railroad. What's interesting about this book is that the Underground Railroad is a physical railroad in this book, when obviously we know that it wasn't, and so that adds kind of a different layer and a different element to the story as well. But for me, that book was particularly good because of the characters, and I think if you like strong characters that you can really root for and that you really feel for, who are in quite bleak, well, they are in bleak circumstances, then I think that that would also be a really good comparison for you as well. And that is it. Do let me know if you've got any recommendations based on any of the books that I have talked about. Let me know if there's any that you would like me to do a comparison for. I would love to chat more with you in the comments. For now, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you are all keeping safe and well. Take care, and I'll see you soon.